obviously, since we've been doing these, a heck of a lot has been moving really quickly. Just for context here, the last Future of Social event was, I think, the last big event I attended in person. We had gloves. We had just heard that maybe COVID was transmitted by touch. It wasn't in the US yet, and we gave people gloves for it. We're now here not quite a year later, and a hell of a lot has changed. In a lot of ways, I think we all see and can agree that a lot of trends we were discussing then. Oh, sorry. I got to figure out how to turn off my annoying browser sounds. Welcome to the Zoom future. Let's just see. Sorry, it's like funny. This is like a classic COVID moment, right? So yeah. So as I was saying, the since we kicked this off, and we had this last convening, it was in person, and I think we can all agree a lot has happened in terms of just accelerating futures we were talking about then. Panels included, up and coming social networks. We were talking about audio. The Clubhouse founders were there, which was great. We were talking a lot about virtual reality and games and kind of what I think. There was a lot of excitement about what was happening, what was going to happen next in social, but it wasn't real yet. Then we got locked down for a year. And it's really going to be cool to check in now with kind of a few different of the major different themes that we see happening going forward, given that we have this kind of perspective. So with that, kind of context, I think as you all know, we're going to do 3 short panels. We've kind of changed our formats to be like this. So we're going to do one on Superfans, and what's going on with monetization. Substack was around. It's obviously had a big year. Then we'll talk about production and consumption, splintering. And finally, we'll move over and talk about the rise of audio in 3 kind of lightning sessions and kind of go from there. So thank you all to those who've joined. We've been an awesome community watching live. And then I'm sure, a lot of people are excited about these things long term. And so I'm pretty amped to kind of have that all set up and ready to go. So with that, Adam, is Hamish available yet? Can we patch him in?
Yeah, I think Hamish can just come on up and unmute.
Oh, there he is. Hey, man.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Yeah, you too.
Cool. It's great to see you, man. How's it going?
It's pretty good. I'm dialing in from my bedroom in my apartment in Wellington, New Zealand at the moment, but feeling okay about that.
Excellent. Well, it's a few different time zones away, but that's kind of the future we're in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, got to get used to it.
Cool, man. So I remember, again, I'm really curious to kind of hear your views. There's a lot happening right now around this kind of, we're going to talk about monetization and the Superfans movement, I'd say broadly, but then specifically also with Substack, right? Which, how old is it now? 3 or 4 years old? How old is Substack?
Yeah, with three plus, just over 3 years old.
Yeah. So you're 3 years in, and this is kind of, I remember talking to you in the very early days, right, about kind of like what it was like, even for my wife who founded the information, right, to move off meeting platforms, start doing monetization on her own separately and building community around that, not directly on one of the platforms, but building something off. We now see a world where you see you see communities and like creators popping up in all sorts of places, like natively on Substack, moving over from Twitter, moving from Facebook. But it almost feels like we now live in this world of like multi-platform approaching, right? Where if you're a creator, you have multiple platforms, you're kind of working across verticals. And then how you think about monetization, not just being like ads or a single thing, but kind of being, a multifaceted thing as well. I'm kind of curious what you see. I mean, with the community starting on Substack, right, of writers, where are people coming from? How are they bringing audiences over? And how are you seeing how they think about monetization overall evolve?
They're coming from, in the early days of Substack at least, it's very tilted towards people who have large Twitter audiences. Yeah. Journalists, especially with really devoted followings, or kind of domain experts who have built up a devoted following on social media. So it doesn't necessarily mean a huge following, because some people have large Twitter followings for arbitrary reasons. But those with intense engagements who know that if they move over to something like Substack and announce themselves to the world, that's people are going to follow in just because of that pre-existing relationship. So that's where a lot of them are coming from. In terms of what's the kind of cocktail of revenue generating options for them. We try as hard as possible to push them to focus just on subscriptions, because other things can muddy the waters a little bit and muddy the focus. And if you're creating something that's ad product / subscription products, then it affects the way you write, it affects the content you produce, and it affects your ability to be great at one or the other.
Yep.
So in spite of that, some people are kind of running their own homespun ads and sponsorships in their Substack publications, but we hope and encourage them to keep the focus on subscriptions.
Yeah. And again, not to, I mean, that's obviously a theme, my wife believes in and what she's built, right, with the information, which is, pretty large subscription only focus with that exact mission in mind. I'm just kind of curious though, when you think about content creators in general, right? Like journalists, I think there's a thing we can both agree with each other on around that, right? But when you think kind of about other communities, like you're seeing a lot of people treat social networks as like top of funnel, right? So for you guys, it might be top of funnel where like Twitter is kind of your big audience and your super fans move into Substack and kind of follow you there. With Instagram and TikTok, a lot of that's OnlyFans, right? Which is a similar mechanic, sort of, right? I'm kind of curious if you agree that it's similar or not, right? First, but then it's interesting to me to think about if you think about social media as kind of reach, and then the monetization coming from depth effectively, if you think that's kind of like here to stay and static, or do you think that that's kind of still in play and in motion in terms of how people think about that and kind of how people mix things around in terms of monetization and things like that?
Feels like it could be a true thing that's going to last for a while. I can say that much at least. And I'm not sure, like the sort of the reach versus depth dichotomy. The way I've always thought about it is that you are not paying for the content or the sort of light engagement. You're paying for the relationship.
Yeah.
So I guess that is depth. I think it's true that I think Instagram/TikTok to OnlyFans is kind of a good analogy for Twitter to Substack, and I think it's partly to do with the low barrier to entry for producing content on Instagram and well, the TikTok can get pretty serious, and the visual nature of it all to OnlyFans. We have got a bunch of people who are succeeding on Instagram who are also succeeding in Twitter. They just tend to be the sort of writing focused people or kind of like serious media focused people. Yeah. And it's an area for us to like do better at over time, basically. We're excited about the opportunity.
And when you think about that relationship, I'm kind of curious, like one of the mechanics I think is super interesting about OnlyFans is, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree with this, is like, to me, the subscriptions in OnlyFans is actually just a qualification step, right? Like where people really make money on OnlyFans is messaging, right? Like, and like a lot of like the actual, like, and so, it's interesting because like, again, like when I look at it, and I don't know the internal numbers obviously, but it's kind of like, okay, you're a super casual fan of some random person, right? You might be on Instagram or TikTok. They funnel you into OnlyFans. They then qualify you by having you subscribe, right? And then once you're subscribed, they actually make all the money from the smallest subset of those fans, right? With like active messaging engagement. I'm kind of curious, like in Substack, you go from like the big to the subscription level, but there's no like, the joke is like, any good cult or whatever, there's always another level that you haven't yet gotten to, right? Is there like ever going to be like another level in your minds to something like to what you're doing at Substack, or how do you think that kind of plays out over time?
Yeah, I think there will be, and that will be expressed largely through community features in Substack. At the moment, there is a basic another level where you can have your monthly subscribers, your annual subscribers, and you can have a founding member tier. And the author can set it up so that whoever's coming in to be a founding member can type in the number they want to pay. And sometimes those numbers get huge. Like Slate Star Codex is now on Substack, for instance, has some major supporters who are willing to pay far above the annual price.
What is far above? Like 5x, 10x?
Well, I would say, like, not to talk about his publication in particular, but yeah, we definitely see. I've seen massively more than 10x across Substack publications.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry, I cut you off. Keep going.
No, it's all right. It's all right. And we have only like, that's really basic expression. We don't even do something. For example, someone's asking if we can put a little star beside the names of founding members when they participate in the comments of their publication. Really simple thing. We just haven't got around to doing it, but we'll do it. And there's lots of other interesting kind of status related stuff to explore there.
Yeah. So interesting. Like, let's talk about that for a second, which is like social capital and status as currency around these like cult influencers, or however you want to like frame what it now means to lead. It's fascinating to me when you think about monetization of creators, right? I can't help but watch what's going on with like a Chamath or like Elon Musk, right? Where you think about like how they're monetizing their communities. They're monetizing their communities by like getting them to pump things they want to invest in. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's like not ads. It's not subscriptions. It's just like straight influence to dollars, right? In like Dogecoin or something, right? Like, and like, how do you think about that? You know, as the future rolls forward, like, because obviously, like, you know, Substack being an example, it's like once you've kind of done a really good funnel and you've like identified your super fans and invested in them, and again, like, let's pretend we're all just building cults at this point, like, I don't know, how do you think that plays out? And like, is that, I don't know, do you think at all about it, or am I being too abstract?
Well, I never thought about what Elon and Chamath are doing in those terms. It's a really fascinating way of looking at it. And if you accept that that is what they're doing, then I think that's pretty evil. I think it's like it's a different it's like the modern variation on the sell your yoga classes in the back, like get people to read for the your content and then sell your yoga classes or your consulting sessions. With that part, that is certainly not evil. I just think it's kind of like an inefficient way to do that kind of business. But if it's like kind of manipulate the stock market for personal gain by monetizing your influence, it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good in the way that subscriptions feel good.
But that's like too brutal, right? Like I'm trying to say more broad. Like I get that is pretty. Again, you can frame a lot of things in a positive or a negative light. I mean, just more like, look, maybe if you believe in something, it's just an interesting thing, which is like, what is influence? What is a community of super fans? And like, how do you think about the relationship between financial capital and social capital, right? And like, we initially have existed in early social days in a world where it's just like, look, you get a bunch of reach. Someone will pay you broadly something to like reach some huge audience. Maybe it's a little bit targeted, like whatever. We now seem like we're moving into like V2 of that. We'd be like, no, like I'm interesting, my content's interesting, pay me, right? Like in some way, shape, or form. So, but the other thing is like, you think about like efficient and inefficient ways to leverage social capital. Is like if you really believe in something, right? Or like whatever, there's a world in which like, if you have the power to bring people along with you in a deep way, and you know, to that point about intimacy, who those relationships are, you know, there are lots of really valuable ways that might be more aligned, right? To like monetize that. And so it's like, it's kind of interesting. I'm just thinking about where this ends up going, so to speak, right? Which is like, you know, clearly we're going to move beyond the world of like broad, basic TV ads hawking products, right? But like the question is like when you think of the full suite of you know, monetization and like what does it mean to have a what feels to me like a cult right around you in a lot of ways, like what do you do with that?
Yeah, I'm not saying that won't be a big part of the world. I think that will be a big part of the world, and you know, Joe Rogan's a great example of it. But I think it's a different world to the world that Substack is trying to bring into the world, where we're talking about monetizing directly through subscriptions, where you're kind of paying for a trusted relationship, and it's very closely tied to the actual work you're doing there on the platform.
Yeah, interesting. So do you think is paid messaging or like consulting in some form ever in Substack's future?
Well, people kind of do that already in the meantime. Like you subscribe here, and if you pay the founding member tier, maybe you get some Zoom calls every month, or they advertise consulting services on the back. I'm not sure if I think we're not going to close off the door to like paid messaging or paid consulting. Basically, it's interesting.
Yeah, I know. I just think it's really interesting with the OnlyFans analogy in mind, which is a fascinating platform. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you? I'm kind of curious. Are there any like? So the other big thing that I see happening out there, looking across, is, and I'm curious if you have viewpoints on monetizing it and super fandom, is cross promotion, right? And so you know what you're seeing in a lot of places. I'm not sure how much you see it on Substack. I'll be curious. Is like, people want to increase their reach and power, and like on social, like that's all algorithmic, right? It's just like, all right, like you get served to people because you clicked on some other random people, but in a lot of other platforms is not, right? Like it's actually endorsement based. And so you're seeing these kind of things where like people will post each other to like effectively try to reach overlapping but new audiences. And it's a really interesting thing about like, I'm curious, one, if you're seeing that behavior a bunch on Substack, and like, then how much do you think about that mattering to the future, right? In terms of how people think about using their influence and power to either directly or indirectly monetize.
Yeah, we think we see it happening. People do it in ad hoc ways. subscribe to this person's newsletter. I really trust them. They're a trusted voice. And then that person returns a favor.
Is it generally done as a favor both ways, or is there a payment exchanging hands sometimes?
I've never seen it happen, and we haven't facilitated it to happen with a payment involved. It's always kind of favors or just genuine belief. And sometimes people just promote their friend because they want their friend to succeed and they get nothing in return. And that is the kind of thing.
Undying fealty and loyalty of their friend, right?
you get paid in different ways. Yes, exactly. The social benefits. And that kind of stuff we really want to encourage. And in fact, we might get up to a point where there's some sort of like financial transaction involved. But in the meantime, we are really big believers in a recommendation network that's peer-to-peer.
Yeah, fair enough. Got it. So when you think about like the wild utopic dystopic future of like 5 years from now, right? Because like everything's gotten so compressed, right? Like we're now, it's funny, I do feel in certain corners, I'm not sure if you agree, that we're starting to like run out of science fiction, right? Like there's this period, I feel like where all we were doing was just playing out obvious science fiction narratives. Like literally, I felt like my job was basically to go read a bunch of science fiction I liked, take it more seriously than everyone else, and then just build the shit that's in the science fiction. And like, that's clearly not true in a bunch of topics like space and da-da-da-da. But when it comes to like communication and like a lot of the core stuff, like I feel like we're almost running out of science fiction. So I'm kind of curious, when you think 5 years forward, when you think about like these like leaders, cults, super fans, and monetization, like what are some of like the weirdest things you think could happen in terms of where we're going?
Like the sort of dark vision is what happens if people get really good at gaming this system where they can turn charisma into dollars, and nothing else matters more than the charisma. I think the sort of fixation on it all being cults only captures a part of it. And there are certain cults that really do well in Substack, and then there are other people who are just doing sort of honest grind work, and it's valued by the community because no one else is writing about climate change or like gene therapy in the same terms, for example. But yeah, my dark vision of it would be if it does become dominated by cults, people figure out how to become cult leaders to the maximum extent because information is sharing better and they have models to follow, and then these kind of communities just become dominated by just become a way to fund terrible shit. I hope that doesn't happen, or I hope there are things we can do to disincentivize that. But that is a dark vision.
Well, what do you think that is? Because I think like that, like to me, that it is somewhat dystopic. I mean, it's utopic actually. Like let's be like take both sides of the coin. And that like, look, the world's super diverse. You know, everyone forgets that in the early days of the internet, the thing that was most amazing is you could be into these like super niche things that like no one else gave a shit about, right? And like, you know, you're sitting in suburbia and you're at the mall and like you're all listening to the same music, and like most of the kids felt like misfits. Most people felt like they couldn't be themselves. And now it's like you can subdivide these communities so finely out of 8 billion people that like it's called like, but it's also like you get to be your own thing. You get to do your own thing and find people like you. I think that's really magical. So like, when you think about like it's both utopic and dystopic, like is your concern just that like we get super disconnected from everyone else and from reality because everyone kind of filters into these like communities, or is it something else?
Is that a leading question?
Well, I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm just bullshitting.
Yeah. Yes, I think that is a potential downside of this particular subscription model. Whereas, you know, I don't think that it's helpful to just think everything's going to be wonderful. It's not like every model has its downsides, and I think that's one of the risks, and it's important to be aware of those risks. And basically, millions of little tribes, each with their own belief systems and each with their own religions, and maybe they create bad things for the world, but.
Yeah. What about the good?
There might be ways to design around it.
Yeah. So like, let's flip it. If you don't mind, like I'm just again interested in your viewpoint as someone who's kind of like building a lot of these new monetization engines. Like, let's flip around. I mean, like, look, there's going to be a clear future where like you guys offer this. Like Twitter has, I mean, candidly from my perspective, obviously decided to also do this, which is just like very reasonable, right? Like they should, right? Like so it's Facebook. Yep. I saw you writing about how like you're happy that everyone else is the big platforms are also coming into this mechanic, like. You know, so like let's pretend this becomes super mainstream. Like, what's your like your utopia view where like this like fundamentally like, you know what I mean, where like beyond just like helping a bunch of creators, you know, not have corporate jobs, which is clearly like something I keep hearing from like the next generation, is like none of them want to work at big companies. Like no one wants to work at companies anymore. And so like I get that, but like what's your like the world is saved version of the future on like these kind of influencers and communities?
Yeah, I I think about it from the reader's perspective more often, where the reader gets connected to stuff that better feeds their mind, so they can help understand the world in a better way, because they can connect with someone serving something they're really hungry for in a very specific way, and that could be that can be across that can be any type of community or video or writing or whatever. And that they seek out and decide to consume that information based on strength, not based on like being in a weak state of mind where they're sort of thumbing through a feed. They get to make these decisions in a considered way, where they're realizing that they're sitting back and making a big commitment to follow this person and bring them into their inbox or into their world.
Fair enough. I have one more question for you, and then I want to see if anyone we can chime in with questions from the audience. But I'm kind of curious because like this is another like interesting version of the future I feel like you guys will see first. Have you seen anyone like straight up get canceled on Substack, where like they do something and like they had an audience and their audience is like, fuck you, we're out? Or has that not yet become like because it seems like a really interesting dynamic that's now possible?
Haven't seen it so far.
Okay. I'm going to be looking out for that. I assume that at some point that will happen, where there'll be like a revolt of the superfans, and it will be really interesting, right? Because all of a sudden it's not just like a following. It'll be like, oh my God, that was my livelihood, right? That like just got chopped off because I transgressed against some norm of the community I built, right?
I kind of look forward to that. I mean, I find it, if they are cult leaders as you described, then it might be quite hard for them to cross that line with their own followers. But if they do and they get kind of punished for it effectively, then it's kind of the system working.
Yeah, no, potentially, right? Potentially, it'd be super interesting. All right, so I don't know, Adam, if you have questions I can chime in from, or there's one in the Q&A we should go after, which is from Derek. It says, Substack's fantastic platform, communities based around long form content. Thanks for building it. Given your background at Kick, how do you think about communities built around short form written content?
Yeah, my background at Kick was a lot shorter than Chris and Jiraj, my co-founders. And I think we're really interested in short form content, regardless of their background at Kick. I think just the idea, like, I'm not committing us to anything or like indicating that we're building this or anything.
This is just,
but like, what if Facebook or what if Twitter button advertising was never part of the model? It's a really interesting question. Like, what if there were a big interest graph based around all types of content, where the underlying financial model is based on subscriptions, direct payments rather than advertising? Like, if that thing existed, I think it would be pretty fucking interesting. I think it would be probably good.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you even personally, you know, I have this problem, and I've seen other people on this. Like, I don't know if you probably don't notice, but like, so like I obviously write for my wife's publication, the information, like long form content. And like it's hard. Like it takes a long time to write something that you want to like publish that way. Whereas like I always like publish on Twitter these like short form essays that are just like, you know, I write them in a few minutes and whatever, I dash them. It's funny because I've seen other people, even like people who are pretty serious, like Eric Newcomer, who's like actually started out his career working for my wife and like left and now has a Substack, I think, right? Like, but Newcomer started, you know, he was one of the first people with the information. And like, he said the same thing where he's like, I don't like, I want to say stuff that I think people might find valuable, but it's like not valuable enough to publish as like a super long form thing. Like, where is the space for that thing? So it sounds like you guys are thinking about that too. And someday, I mean, again, like not committing you to anything, but it's like not unreasonable to believe that like you would subscribe to short form content in some way, shape or form.
Or you subscribe to a person for whom short form content is part of the mix. Like, I kind of think Substack can already serve that to some extent by writing just for your paying audience, because those are the people who already decided that they want to go into the weeds with you and happy to hear your B material.
Yeah, and I actually, for what it's worth, like this is ancient history, but in like 2008, I actually started a platform called Letterly, right?
Yeah.
Which was basically
Awesome.
Substack-esque. I mean, we never went as far with it, but we had like getting millions of dollars in top line, right, in terms of community payments and people paying for email newsletters, right? And I had one myself, but what I did is I split it. I had my primary one, and then I had like a short form one, which was much higher volume that I just didn't really care about, and I would pump. But I was literally like, I ran 2 feeds for exactly this purpose in an earlier age. So I wouldn't. It's just interesting when you think about understanding your audience, what they're actually looking for. Like, and email kind of like cadence is an interesting problem.
Which newsletter had the most followers? The short one. Or the long one?
It was a mommy blog. There was like one woman.
No, I mean out of your 2.
Oh, out of my 2.
People want to get.
The longer form one did, but honestly, that's because I also promoted it more. It was kind of like, here's the normal thing, and then like if you really want to see everything I'm writing, here's kind of my drafts folder, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting product dynamic to solve, right? About like, okay, so you have a cult, you are a super fan, you're not being like algorithmically moderated, right? So it doesn't. So you actually have to care about how often you're interrupting people. Right, is like an interesting problem, right? Assuming they actually care, as opposed to just being like, I can post into the oblivion and Twitter will take care of it for me, right? It's an interesting dynamic.
Cool. It's really cool to think about.
Yeah. So I guess the last question I'll end with, just because it comes up, in the Q&A, I think it's like a really interesting one. I'm actually fascinated by this. Is like content moderation. I feel like my 2 cents. When you think about especially cult leaders, your point about like extremism, like people really wanting content from a person, and then what's happening with you guys and Clubhouse, right, as like 2 next generation platforms, is like, what's going to happen here? Like, how do you think about this at all? I mean, I think have said, I'll shut up in a second, but you said publicly like you're pretty anti-content moderation because like you're just pipes and like you're delivering what the communities say they want, right, to some degree. But like, how do you think about that, and what lines do you think you can really hold?
Yeah, well, we have published a statement about this. We are very strongly free press, and we find it very difficult to separate free speech from being free press.
Yeah.
So obviously free press is important. Freedom of expression is really important to us. Freedom of speech is really important to us. We don't want to put ourselves in the position where we're deciding what is misinformation or not, for example. And we don't feel like the burden on Substack is as high to do that as it is in other places where they are having a greater role in determining what you see and having a greater role in determining what gets amplified and boosted. So our standing approach, which we will hold the line on as much as we can, is be hands-off on content moderation. Instead, apply all the thinking for how good content is disseminated and understood to the design of the system. So if we don't incentivize stuff that helps amplify misinformation, then maybe the problem can be less acute on Substack. And so far that's held true, but it's a really difficult question. It's never not going to be difficult.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be interesting because I think that the knock on subscriptions, from my perspective, right? And I think you, again, like, it's not just you guys. Like, I think you absolutely see this in OnlyFans. Like, OnlyFans is like out of control, right? Like, there's just crazy shit going on there, right? And it's because when you sub-select an audience and you're really going for this depth of engagement versus whatever, it turns out that like some weird people into literally almost anything, right? And like extremism sells. And so it'll be interesting to see how, like, there's an argument that like Coca-Cola driven mass market audiences will be more centrist and tend towards more centrism. And like what's happened is, if anything, from a monetization perspective, when you go to targeted ads, you get more extremism. There's an argument that when you go to subscription-based stuff, which again, like makes all the sense in the world, right? And being hands-off makes all the sense in the world. Like you're just going to keep pushing that boundary as effectively, basically as the cult platforms get better, right? And so we'll have to see what happens there. But I mean, my 2 cents, which should be worth nothing to anyone, is like, yeah, I think that's like the right approach, which is like, look, we're just infrastructure, like, these people selected it themselves. So anyway,
we do have content guidelines. So when there are extremes, we have to intervene. There is a tool there available for it. But yeah, we try to be hands off.
Cool, man. Thank you. This was super fun. I appreciate the conversation. I mean, it's a crazy world.
Thank you.
Congrats on all the success. I mean, you guys,
thank you.
I do remember you coming by your early days, and like you guys have just absolutely crushed it. So congrats on everything.
Thanks very much.
Cheers,
dude. Thanks for the conversation. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Super fun. Talk to you, dude. All right, Adam. What's up, dude?
So First of all, thank you a ton, Hamish. That was like really awesome. Want to invite up Niko Bonatsos from General Catalyst to talk about some of the dynamics at play with the splintering of consumption and production, and some of the lessons learned from TikTok.
Niko.
Hi, how are you guys doing? Thank you for
You're
inviting
coming
me.
from literally the opposite side of the world, aren't you?
Well, I'm in Greece right now. Like a lot of our portfolio company founders, we operate as a distributed team. So what a better way for me to empathize.
I just love that we're now hosting. Last year, this was all in person. This year, we've got so far the first two mini conversations we've done are with New Zealand and Greece.
Amazing. I remember this was the last event that I attended in person, the one you guys did in San Francisco. It was an amazing event. Like you packed the room
really
with everybody who mattered in consumer social, and some of the people have continued to execute or build new emerging platforms with a lot of promise. So too bad we can't get together again, be in person and chit chat afterwards, right?
Well, yeah, we have to figure out the beer solution. We're not there yet. Anyway, man. So listen, you and I can talk about a whole bunch of shit, right, around this stuff. And like, I mean, we can wander because why not? But also just to frame the conversation. I mean, one of the things I'm really interested in, and I think you are too, is I'll call it the professionalization of social media, right? And this idea that like, pre-internet, you had People magazine, like these mass celebrities that were like honestly not that interesting, but they had broad appeal and they had distribution of the checkout line in your grocery store, and there was nothing else. So whatever, right? Then you get like, and then there's obviously some variation with cable or whatever, but then you get the internet and all of a sudden the rise of social platforms. And the story was, look, it turns out that like your real friends are actually more interesting than these like checkout market fake celebrities, right? Like they're just better, right? Like it turns out those like fake celebrities aren't that interesting. I feel like we're in this era of like the return or like the rise of like the professional social media fan, where it turns out that like honestly like influencers are more attractive, funnier, better at producing content than your real friends. So like these platforms that were like kind of designed to be like of the people and for your friends, actually the reality is I'd rather follow the best skiers and like the best surfers, and like my real friends are just not that interesting. They're going to lose the competition for my attention, right? And that there's a lot of implications to that in terms of like the shape of social media, and really whether we even call it social media anymore, or whether it's just media, right? And like things like that. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, TikTok is a great recent example of a rise of a new platform like this. What you're seeing around the power law trends, what does it mean that I'm just a consumer now versus being a consumer and producer, and how that all is going to play out?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I covered a lot of ground. I like the framework. So let me share some thoughts. So today there's so many different ways to produce content online and easily, and you can do it from your phone. And, creativity exists out there. The internet is amazing as a distribution powerhouse to tap into all the long tails out there. So are you good with your voice, with your singing, with your dancing, lip syncing? Can you do like short videos, vertical videos, long videos, tweets, text, memes, remixing, whatever that is, right? There should be something that you are good at. And especially if you're on the younger side and you've been really bored to be on the same horizontal social network with your parents, with your older siblings, you're pretty good at figuring out that whatever the next cool kid is emerging, you can probably ride that distribution. And if it runs, you can emerge and become the pro. You can be one of the stars in that new network that very few others know how to master. And that's frankly, the story of the last few years, where you've seen those very strong celebrity influencers who have the distribution, have mastered the medium. In some instances, they've gone even cross-platform, which is like fascinating. And those people today are operating like businesses of one. So they even have like a team, they have a manager. In the beginning, it's their mom or dad or older sibling. They are really smart, not to just be looking for a quick sponsorship to pay them up front, as you did before, but they now are starting to think like equity holders, which is like fascinating. And they're thinking about incorporating themselves. They're even thinking about like doing startups on their own, or launch their own private Twitter, YouTube-esque client so that they can chat with their own community of users because they understand that the horizontal networks are sucking all the juice, from them. So if I'm a power influencer today, what do I want, right? I want to be able to know who's consuming my content. I want to know how can charge people, like make money from them. I want to know who's interested in whatever I'm doing, and also do pretty much nothing differently when it comes to producing the content. So the horizontal platforms are not offering that, but there's some newcomers in the form of private communities or some tech-savvy influencers who are teaming up with developers to do that. So I'm very excited about that space, and maybe, in the future we see like a community of micro communities that emerges, almost like a next generation Discord that could become like a sizable platform over there.
And I think, look, I mean, I obviously, like, it's always fun to have panels where we're just, plus wanting each other. But yes, I completely agree. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I'm kind of curious, when you think about those micro communities forming and like a community of communities, the story has been on the big social platforms, like groups, like flat groups, right? And what's interesting about flat groups, so like take like a group, Facebook obviously is enormous in this, right? You have like an administrator, but the administrator is pretty weak, right? It's really about like the community, which makes sense given their cultural heritage, like where they're coming from. You look at even things like Discord, right? It's like pretty flat in its design, right? And what's interesting is, I'm kind of curious how you think about this. Clubhouse is kind of an interesting example of the opposite, right? And what I mean by that is like, you have these groups or communities, but they're really just dominated by whoever is like on stage and speaking and whoever gets to speak around them. Like in some ways, it's like a very elitist form of media. I'll try this thesis on you. It's a very elitist form of media, right? And so, but it is kind of designed much more around personalities and cults and this idea that like, no, we're not all equal. Like we're not all producing content. I'm producing content and you're a consumer of content. Do you think like, how much do you think like that is like a fundamental shift versus like a one-off product thing for Clubhouse? And like, do you think that like, in a lot of ways, like that's what's missing when you think about communities of communities or groups of groups? Do we need to stop calling them communities? Right? Or is it like a slightly different tweak? Yeah,
that's a good point, right? Because today, like I'm following somebody because I love her or his content. And it may be aspirational, or I want to learn something from her. I'm obsessed with it. I don't necessarily know that person, like she or he is not a friend of mine, but I want to get more from her. So when I join that person's group, or when I start even, paying her a subscription or like a tip, do I think of myself as somebody who has joined that person's community? Not necessarily. I may just be like a fan. I may just be somebody who is really eager, to enjoy more content. So I think the world community, frankly, has been a little bit abused by VCs and founders because often a lot of these products are not like bi-directional, they're like one way. And also the other thing is, some people have become so good at producing content. So if I'm the new kid in the block, tough luck. Like I can't do it, right? Even if I want to make money and become famous on Twitch today, it's tricky. If I want to do the same on YouTube, harder. Easier to do on a younger platform, like you saw on Clubhouse, right? Obviously, whoever has been on the suggested people list, freaking awesome. Or those who joined early and they put in the time, they figured out how the system works. Now they have tens of thousands of followers.
Maybe.
But if
can I challenge that? Can I challenge that
please.
thesis? So I think that's broadly right. And like I certainly agree that like whenever a new platform is born, usually what happens is there's like a dump of free social capital that whoever happens to be around can go and hoover up, right? And so like,
correct.
If you think about it, like take TikTok. Like TikTok was spending billions of dollars on ads to bring
40 million a month on Snap alone for some time, right? They bought their way to success. Unbelievable.
Which was fascinating, right? It turns out you can actually buy your way.
You can.
I mean, everyone was very skeptical. They're saying, oh, they're spending all this money. There's no retention. It's not going to work. And it did. But it's interesting because in some ways what happened was those producers were able to say, okay, I'm actually the content of TikTok. These guys are spending billions of dollars promoting me, right? Like, that's great. Like there's like an angle or an opportunity there. So I think that's it. Now, interestingly, when we think about promoted lists, I don't know if you have this experience, but like I have a lot of friends who are on the original like Twitter promoted list, and they have huge followings on Twitter. But the problem is because they didn't actually organically grow them, it's the wrong people, right? So they might have like 2 million followers, but they're basically all randos, right? And so like the power of that is actually weirdly dilutive. It's not only neutral, it's negative, because it means that every time they post, they're in front of so many people that don't actually care about them that like actually they get all this hate back, right? And so there's an interesting question to me when you think about like how that's evolved, or a Clubhouse, or like what it means to be like a producer versus a consumer. Like, is it important? Like, do you think that Clubhouse is going to have the same problem, right? Where they obviously it's much more elitist media, like asymmetric media, than social media, because it's just like you're listening to like the most interesting people and then who they choose to bring with them effectively. But do you think that that's going to be an issue all over again, or do you think the world's changed enough that won't be a problem from the distribution and growing up of something like a Clubhouse?
Yeah, I mean, normally whenever a platform becomes much bigger, right, they become a victim of their own success. And in social media, there's no such content as like no such concept as like this is too big to fail. But inevitably, you start paying the price. If you become huge, you have moderation issues. If you are starting to sell ads, you want to have a lot more inventory to put ads on. So you get everybody to produce more content. You encourage people to dilute their graph. You encourage your users to really invite everybody in their network and follow them or link to them. So you do all this, growth hacks, because that's what your board wants as VCs. Now, I think Clubhouse is run by very smart founders who've been around the block for a decade. So they have, if anything, been incredible students of what works and what doesn't. And it hasn't clouded, their judgment in a crazy way. It's still early. They've kept it exclusive in terms who gets invited, so they can shape it. They modeled it on top of the Twitter graph in some ways, which has, its pros and its cons, but it's great to get somebody jump started. In the beginning, it was a lot more like peer-to-peer, like back in March, right? I could find you, who I am, or, people 1 degree away from you. Now it's a little bit like chatting with my wife over the weekend. It's a little bit like as if all the marketeers, the self-promoters have come in and they're so eager, to accumulate a following. So at least, for me personally, unless I see the intellectualism of tech and the elitism that you talked about, the vast majority of the conversations, I find them like boring work, It's like, oh my God, so stressful. I go in, it's as if I'm listening to LinkedIn nonstop, talking to me. And Jake Paul very eloquently captured that, said Clubhouse a little bit as if like LinkedIn, with audio. But it's the early days. Certainly I can see a future where they can figure out how to help the creators monetize. And if that's the case, the most interesting people would come in, they have a following, they would be interested in producing more content and making like a Twitch for audio, That's the direction they could take it towards.
But it's interesting because again, just to push you and you watch like Clubhouse, it's like I agree with you. Like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, it was actually more, I consider social media, right? Like
now it's media. Yeah.
Now it's just media. Right. And like, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I actually think that's the direction everything is going. Like in some ways, I think we might look back and say the era of social media is ending.
Correct. It's
right?
almost like
this might be, we might look back on this period like, wow, there was a 15 to 20 year period of social media. And now there is like messaging in Slack groups where people are mostly peers in private, right? And then there is media, which is just like really interesting distribution platforms effectively matched with head producers who again might not be as big as The Rock, right? It might be like more targeted, right? But it's a very different structure. I see RAA raising his hand, and I'm very curious what RAA wants to ask you, Niko, or talk about. Can we get RAA in? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Hey, RAA, what's up, man?
Hey guys. First of all, Sam, you look great. Like the filter you have is like unbelievable. Like 10 years younger than I remember you. But great discussion. Thanks, Niko, as well. But Clubhouse, I mean, think about ultimately, can a company like Clubhouse go all the way is my question, because you guys are financiers, right? So they're at $1 billion now. Can they go all the way, meaning public, or who buys them? Like which platform does Clubhouse fit on? Or
the banker wants to know who buys Clubhouse.
Well,
Aria, do your own job.
Yeah, well, but like meaning like, because the next round is going to be much more in excess of the $1 billion, which may put them out of reach for anyone that would buy them. So like, where does it fit if it can't go independent?
Yeah, I mean, I think putting them out of reach, I'm not sure about that, because if you see a lot of companies, they have like huge market cap, and now there's so many SPACs out there that definitely may be interested in doing something with a fast rising next generation social media player, right? When that happens, TBD, as a company, can they go all the way? They definitely have captured lightning in the bottle today. They definitely have a very seasoned founder group and all the cash in the world to be a lot more aggressive, make more mistakes, and try to expand on the goodwill from their users. I like that the pandemic is really fueling a lot of the existing use cases on Clubhouse. And as more and more successful creators flock in, if there is a monetization play over there, they could have their own sustainable business model on top of it. So can they run? Yeah, I think they can run. Who buys them? There are some of the other social networking or media companies. You could see, like even an Amazon come in and get excited because, as I said, maybe, this is like Twitch for audio and like 10 times bigger. You could argue, that something like that could be the case. I don't know. Sam, what do you think?
Well, I'd say two things. One is, I think the analogy to Snapchat is very good, right? And what I mean by that is, like, if you think about what Snapchat was born out of a product innovation, not pure technical, not anything. They captured the right moment in the right time with the stories format. What happens in the stories format? Unsurprisingly, it's everywhere. Like, the joke is, I love the joke that like even Excel has stories now, right? But like the stories format has gone like everywhere, right? It was a good product innovation. Now, Snap has done a great job staying relevant, continuing to innovate, building its own things. Pretty big company, right? And so I think you could imagine Clubhouse doing that. If you force me right now, and I think the other thing in mind is, like, the founders, as far as I know, and the team around there, they have no interest in selling, right? They want to play for the whole game, right? And so I don't think you can actually practically see anything. But like, if you were to, the obvious acquirer is Twitter, right? I think because, as Niko pointed out, it's built around Twitter. It's a similar, I think, set of community. I think it's good, and like Twitter needs them. They can afford it right now, the whole 9 yards, from my perspective. It's also interesting. I think, Hamish was on before, another Substack, same thing. It's like in some ways inexcusable that like Substack exists with respect to the Substack team. Like, it's built on Twitter, right? And like, so there's an argument that like in some ways Twitter's very slow product innovation has allowed a lot of these things to happen. And that could be fine. Maybe they buy them again. Maybe they just compete with them, whatever. But I think what's undeniable is like this audio formatty thing is real from my perspective, even if I personally think, as Niko said, the average content quality is very low, right? Like, I actually think most conversations on Clubhouse are unlistenable and like will continue to be. And I actually don't even believe in live formats like in that way in a lot of ways. But I think the mechanic is real, and they have some lightning in a bottle, and they can go in a lot of directions. But I think it'll ultimately be the founders' decisions. Like, I don't know. Like, I can't imagine Amazon buying them, because if I'm then, why on earth would I sell it to Amazon? Right? Like, maybe if I sell to Twitter in the right scenario, I can understand why this helps me become a world dominant power platform and player, and like that's a really interesting team up. But Amazon, as much as I love Amazon, right? Like, I don't buy it, right? It's too boring.
Speaking of like boring stuff, Sam, I mean, sure, a bunch of the conversations were very fascinating. People ridiculously gifted talk about stuff is cool. But if you think about like the food analogy, most people want to go to McDonald's, where, the food may not be the highest quality, but it's like really cheap, and it really feeds the masses. So if you look into the vast majority of media sites out there, the content may not be for the elite, but it is for most people. So I would assume that Clubhouse will have to resemble that. And TED is like a good franchise, but you got to be the McDonald's of media if you want to build something massive.
I'm not, so I may be, but I think everyone's definition of McDonald's is a little different. I mean, I guess the question is, we started this topic talking about structuring consumption and production, right? Yeah. I think Clubhouse is a really good example of how the future of quote unquote social media is that splintering, right? It's like like there's a stage. I'm there for the people on stage. I don't care who's in the audience, right? Like I'm there for the production side. And frankly, like most people on Clubhouse, the good news about speaking in conversations is so cheap, right? Humans are designed for this. You and I can do this all day. We're like, it's not like trying to figure out what to post. Like it's very inclusive in theory, but in practice, you really just want to hear from Mark Andreessen or something, right? So it fits very well with that theme. It also fits very well with the cult theme, where it's like, does Mark Andreessen have a viewpoint on everything? Sure, he can make up a viewpoint on everything. Will people want to listen to it? Probably. Whether or not he's informed, whether because it's a cult, like it doesn't matter. It's not it's about the personality. So I think it all fits really well there. The question, I guess, will be like, what comes after that, right? And like, is it just scalable one-on-one messaging, as Hamish and I were talking about with OnlyFans? We're like, all right, like I want more than just what everyone else is getting, so I want like it to move into the messaging direction. Is it like some sort of like multi-level marketing thing where like we all love Mark Andreessen, but like we have our like local club with like our local leadership effectively of like Mark Andreessen fans, right? Like the sub-cult community effectively, like. And like, how does that end up manifesting in media, messaging, et cetera? Is kind of almost what I would think about.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, we're going to see verticals emerge over there. So, for example, one use case today, are you a founder? Are you raising money? That's a pretty good place to go and like blow some smoke, be in the business of getting attention from VCs. Like it works today. It's going to work, like in 6 months or a year from today. I don't know. Today, it's actually a pretty good place for anybody who's interested in like thinking about how to make more money, how to invest their money, how should they be thinking about crypto. There are a lot of those folks who have come in and producing such content. Is it the best quality content? I don't know, anybody can judge, but maybe there is a sub vertical that emerges where it's like, audio content for wealth management advice.
Maybe, but just to push you again, like I think the question is in my mind on that is like, it's not going to be the highest quality content by structure. And even this, I love you, Niko. We can bullshit all we want. Some people might want to listen. Most people want to.
We're not getting paid though now, man. Whereas on Clubhouse, we could be getting paid, and it would be amazing.
Yeah, but then we wouldn't have. But here's the thing: we can do this because you and I, like, again, there's an interesting hack going on where you think it's not. What do you think about the audience, right? So like, there's a fundamental reality. There are 51 people. We all know, you don't know exactly who they are. I don't either, but I know who was invited and I know we controlled the guest list, right? And that changes what we can say. Now it's recorded, but you can trust me and you should, that it's not going to go posted publicly everywhere. Like, well, that audience matters, right? And the control around it matters. The interesting thing for me is like right now Clubhouse, when you think about the VC or the person raising money, or even just like the person talking about investing, there's a like verbal diarrhea effectively, which is like when I'm just like, blah, you're only here if you care about it and like whatever, where like actually if you compress the most valuable parts out of it, it could be very high quality, but per unit of time, it's very low quality, right? Like it's not edited, right? Whereas like anything that's edited is better. Correct. So the question in my mind is like, as those dynamics shift, I just wonder if we end up in a world where like when you show up to listen to someone or interact with them, it's either because you're in the cult and you just want to hear them and like the connection matters to you to believe. And so like, it doesn't matter if it's low quality content. I'm really just there to believe. Correct. Or I'm in like information mode and I actually want the best answer. And for now, there might be this brief window where the fact that it's not recorded and I didn't write it anywhere means there's stuff on Clubhouse that doesn't exist anywhere else. But I can't imagine that long-term that persists. Right. Yeah. People will start. Yeah.
So obviously not everybody's a believer, right? So, but in a world where folks are valuing their time more than anything else, and they know what kind of information they're looking for, maybe there is a curation service for Clubhouse, or maybe there is the opportunity to listen to content at a 2x or 3x speed, if they move.
Well, that's what I do. For what it's worth, that's actually what I do on Clubhouse, because there are sometimes conversations I want to hear, but they're on average boring. So I record the ball and transcribe them all, and then
There
I
you
listen to
go.
them at high speed. And like, I think that's clearly a future product of the future, the curation around this stuff, because no one actually wants to listen to the raw content, right? Like, I think for information, you might want to listen to it for community, or like
for entertainment, right? Or if you want to be in the moment, I lived this. It was an experience, like, you know, being at the concert, right? Where you can carry it for the rest of your life, especially if it's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't this the history of, like, you know, media and the internet, where you go from bundling to unbundling, from curation to everybody can hold their own mic, and then, you know, a lot of gems pop up, but the bulk of it is garbage, and you have moderation issues. So I think there's always, you know, like a pendulum that's going back and forth here.
Yeah. Okay. So
And
we
with
got two
audio,
quick...
like, I personally would be very eager to see how a peer-to-peer version of that is going to look like. I would be really eager to see. And
say more about peer-to-peer version, because again, like, I think the direction is away from peer-to-peer. So what do you mean by peer-to-peer?
It is away from that. So I'd like to see how folks could be using audio to with their besties, right? Like as a communication mechanism. And should it be around the very specific use case, like how Discord did it back in the day with gaming? I don't know. But like, how would you recreate the snap graph for audio today? Would you go about that? Nobody has built that. It's not easy. A bunch of folks have tried, or I'm sure are trying today. But that's something really valuable, because what I like about all the voice companies is that they're not really easy to be copied by the bigger players. Because if I'm on Instagram, if I'm on Snap today, I'm not thinking of creating content with my voice. Whereas, you know, a new player really has trained me to think about that.
Yeah, although interestingly, like, I agree with you, they're hard to copy, but I think it might be for a slightly different reason, which is it's all about the graph, right? Like, if you're connected to someone on Instagram, that means you want their cool content. That doesn't mean you want to push notification every time they start talking, right?
Right.
If that makes sense. If anything, we've already gone through that with, like, I think a lot of like the quote unquote live experiences, going live type stuff, which I've never found compelling. I don't know about you, but like, that was kind of the attempt. It was single player versus multiplayer. It wasn't as inclusive. I mean, there are some important product differentiations, but like the go live thing, I think has never worked because it was the wrong graph, right?
I mean, live is really hard, right? Because it's a very hard math problem to solve. So
well, it's hard math problem is also just like actually being live is generally crappy content, right?
It is crappy content unless you're a pro, or you've prepped really hard to really produce that content. But I mean, think about it, right? What if we see like a merge between like reality TV and like some of these online social networks? Like, how would that look like? It could be like crappy most of the time, but the highlights could be like unbelievable. So how to curate an experience there.
We're almost out of time. This has been really fun. I guess, like, last question for you, because you said something I totally believe, which is everything's about bundling, unbundling the cycles on these things. You know, if you take the thesis, which is like, we had boring shopping cart aisle celebrities. Your friends outcompeted them with like, and you know, first it was like your friends generally, then it was like your friends plus cool Instagram filters. Then the professionals have come in and they've clearly come to dominate because they're better. They look better. They're smarter. They're just better than your friends.
They're their own media brands now. They go on Substack.
Yeah, totally. And so
money.
we're going to see that the next generation is going to be, I just think, continuously back to media dominated by influencers. Like, you don't actually care what your friends are eating, whatever. What's going to be the revenge of your friends? Like, if we believe the bundling, like, how do human beings, who comes and beats these guys? Or like, what innovations need to happen to flip the bit back?
I mean, look, we're seeing a number of vertical social networks where I'm hanging out with my friends on something very specific. Call it, you know, fantasy football, call it my League of Legends experience, but something very specific. If I love hanging out with my friends over there, could these products expand their surface area and start like maybe, you know, bloating their product a little bit to become more of a horizontal experience? TBD. Or is there going to be a next generation horizontal play for the younger folks? Pretty sure like this will happen. Like every time there is a next generation, they come up with new habits. There is always a new form factor or a new device that they get obsessed with. So it's a matter of time. So if you think about what's going on in schools today, right? They're using their computer all day long to consume the content. Maybe somebody could hijack actually the distribution from Google Classroom or the Google Calendar to build a chat app that could emerge into the way that the kids communicate. And then you see what's happening in gaming, where like if I am a Roblox person or a Fortnite like avid user, oh my God, I go there to play, to flirt, to hang out with my friends, consume experiences. This is the place, right? But it doesn't look like the old world that you and I grew up with.
Fair enough, Niko. Well, it's always good bullshitting with you. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it. What time is it in Greece right now?
This is thought leadership, right? Yeah, it's right now it's 9 p.m. and we're just getting started.
All right.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you,
man.
Sam.
We'll
Thank you,
talk
Adam.
again soon. All right. Next up, we talked already about Clubhouse and every single one of these things, which I think is completely fine, given kind of what's happening right now in the world and kind of the things people want in people's mind. But next up, we're gonna kind of broaden it and talk about audio even more directly. We have a great panel. I'll let them introduce themselves coming up, but this will be more than just a one-on-one. We'll do a little kind of group melee. We've got, but I don't know. So I think we've got Josh, Stefan, Ikram, and then is Mazio joining too? Do we have Mazio? Good old Matt Mazio, I think, is joining. Ikram, why don't you introduce yourself? Since you were the guy who first, I think before all this shit became mainstream, you were messing with audio social networks, and we'll go around the horn.
Hey, what's up? Thank you, Sam. How's everyone doing? I'm Ikram. I'm currently working on an app called Ents, which is kind of like Twitter, but voice first. I like how the panel has voice first in its title. So we've been actually working on it for like 4 years. And now I feel like the market is ready for something like Ents. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Stefan, you want to jump in? You've got another weird take on this world.
Sure, Stefan, Alien from LA. Been at Musical.ly and TikTok very early on, and then joined Cameo. Now we're working on Make, which is our take on audio, and just investing a lot in R&D and just figuring out how can we the quality actually get up of people and what they're making, and thinking about what is the right use case, as Niko also said early on. And we believe, I think there is something in music and enabling people to be a bit more musical, like the root of TikTok actually was all about. That's what we're working on.
Awesome. We got Josh, who's become one of the stars of Clubhouse. Josh, introduce yourself.
What's up, guys? I'm Josh Constein. I'm an investor at Signal Fire Early Stage Fund. We invest in the creator economy and a bunch of other stuff. Previously was the editor at large for TechCrunch for 8 years. So wrote a lot about early stage social networks with a big focus on Facebook. Ended up writing the first story ever about Clubhouse, and then starting the first scheduled show there called Press Club. And yeah, have randomly shot up to 1.4 million followers, and I'm just sort of trying to figure out what to do with that now. But yeah, I've had a longstanding thesis that short bite-sized audio would have a resurgence once everyone had headphones in. And now that there's a sort of different talk graph emerging, which is very different than other social networks, where you want to hear much more short-term, hyper-condensed content from people, and that Clubhouse is sort of that unabridged version of celebrities and public figures. Plus, there's a lot of opportunities in social there. So,
and also importantly, Josh, you once told me that back in the early days of Venmo, which Ikram co-founded, you slept on Ikram's couch.
I did fall asleep on Ikram's couch. I think after interviewing you guys the first time, you guys were very hospitable. And then we did a talk at a music festival a few years ago, Sam, which was hilarious because our panel was scheduled for 9 a.m., which is not a thing you want to have scheduled at a music festival, but somehow some people showed up because Sam's face was just so enticing.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, we also went to that Sri Lankan restaurant, Sigiri.
Oh, that was amazing. And you guys paid with Venmo. And I was like, can you even do that?
Part of our introduction to showing you how Venmo could work.
That was very impressive.
Let's keep it. So last on the panel, we have a late joiner, but I'm very happy. Matt Mazio, a good buddy of mine from back in college, also an investor, but also Matt working on an audio thing.
Yeah. It's nice to meet everybody. So I lead early stage consumer code 2. Before this, ran a fund called Lowercase Capital. And then before that was building a venture group at CAA, starting companies like Funny or Die, right in that junction of media have invested a bunch of companies in audio historically. So things like Gimlet Media, which got acquired by Spotify back in the day. It's just fun to see this category sort of exploding. It seems obvious to people who've been building this space that, the devices kind of led the way, AirPods, and, you just have more, a prevalence of more microphones everywhere. And that audio is like so part of the next generation of social products. It almost makes the internet look silent. Like everywhere you go, the internet didn't have a soundtrack to it. There was nothing. And like when you think about every other space you've been to that's hospitable, every coffee shop, every restaurant, they always have something playing in the background. We're finally realizing that you can multitask in audio, and there's like this green field of attention that was always open for this new generation of digital entrants. And so
let me push on that. Matt, you like started by almost half answering this, but I want to hear from the other panelists as well. Like, I mean, especially Ikram, because you've been at this for a while, like figuring it out. You have a short form cool audio product. Like, why now? Like, to me, it's like we're at home, right? So the AirPods thing, which is the AirPods, I'm not even sure. I get it, but I'm not sure I'm convinced because it's all blown up during COVID when we're all sitting on laptops for the first time, right? Like, if anything, like the mobile thing has been broken. So I'm kind of curious, like maybe I'm wrong about that, but like, again, this has been talked about forever. Why isn't there an audio version of blah, blah? And yet here we are sitting at home doing it. Like, what changed this year?
Well, I think I'll chime in quickly. There are a couple of inventions that are becoming more popular now. So like Google Home and Alexa, and I guess before that Siri, are a couple of the products that have conditioned people to communicating with their voice. Like, I think young kids, I mean, if you've ever watched a young kid talk to Alexa, it's very interesting. Like Alexa becomes like their friend. And adults love things like Alexa because it's very convenient. You're like, hey, Alexa, play Jim Reeves. Like, that's what my mom says when she wakes up. She likes Jim Reeves. But then there's this whole group of people in between that are used to text that I think are finally changing their behaviors to things like Alexa and Google Home. And it's conditioning people to realize how convenient communicating and getting things done with your voice is. And I think that's the indicator. And now it's becoming more popular because of things like Clubhouse and whatnot.
I think it all starts always with like being lonely, right? I think a lot of things in social media are about like people feeling lonely and wanting to feel popular, right? And you have like a way to feel popular by actually being popular in IRL, or if you're not, you can use fame to be popular with strangers. And so I think people have been able to do that with all kinds of formats now, but audio was really the last one that wasn't really been used yet, except for like for information with podcasts, etc. And I think as new platforms are coming up where you can use it more for communication and entertainment, people find more of a use case and then get an easier way in. And I think I just saw that was like a new show they talked about, like I think there's now over 140 million people that have more than 100,000 followers. So it gets really hard now with the existing media formats, like really to stand out.
What's that again? How many people have over 100,000 followers?
140 million.
That's like, huge.
Yeah, there's
over 100,000.
Yeah, there's like 100 million over 100,000 and 40 million over a million followers now. So it's really hard to break out anymore on these existing platforms, right? And I think that's part of the reason why Musical.ly and TikTok happened as well, because they couldn't grow on Instagram anymore. Yeah. So I think there is a circle almost like, okay, you have to jump onto a new platform every now and then in order to keep growing. And I think being a YouTuber just overtook for young people the profession of being an artist. So everyone wants to be a content creator. So, what does that mean? That means like you don't have to have a specific skill in music or at being athletic or whatever to get a voice out. And I think a place like Clubhouse is really opening it up for a lot of people, but it's still very much constrained on being extrovert. I think we haven't really cracked introvert yet. I think that's another thing that maybe audio can help, because you don't have to put your face out there.
I think there's three things that I see as being really influential to why this is happening now. One riffs off what Stefan was saying, which is that with new social networks, people don't have a full feed already. They don't feel like they've already filled up all of their sort of inbound bandwidth, and so they're generous with their follows. Whereas in mature social networks, people are very stingy with their follows. They feel like, oh, I've already got my Twitter feed full, so I don't want to add anybody to that, and it makes growth really hard, which means it's harder to attract new users because people are attracted by that growth. The second thing is this concept of the quarantine user loan, which I wrote about right at the beginning of the pandemic, which is basically people are stuck at home, concurrent services that need a lot of people on the app at the same time get this loan of users from the quarantine. And the goal is to get to a sustainable level that they can pay back that loan and still not sort of turn into a ghost town after that. And I think Clubhouse has really succeeded to get to that point. And the third thing is you talked a little bit about headphones and like, oh, it's not about mobile. It's like, I know that I walk around my apartment endlessly listening to Clubhouse. And I think so many people are just trying to fit so many things into their days, especially lots of like housework and chores and things like that. The ability for the network to be only audio and to like give us back our sense of vision means that we can just do other things with it. And the fact that it doesn't have just like a little bit of things you have to look at, I think really makes it more accessible. And then the one final thing is that people are so scheduled right now. We have, meetings to do everything with our friends, whereas we're so used to going to like a party or a venue where we show up and then we mill around and we have discovery and we sort of spontaneously choose what conversations we want to be part of. If we want to go listen to the DJ or if we want to hang back at the bar. And a lot of the modern sort of like Zoom culture doesn't allow that. It's very regimented. You're with these specific people for this specific period of time. And Clubhouse and apps that offer that kind of discovery or sampling where you can jump between different rooms and discover different things, which is something that is so hard with podcasting. You just got to download it, get through the whole intro and their ads at the beginning before I know what even's going on. I think that ability to sample between different rooms is recreating a sense of what we were getting and we're missing in the IRL world.
Let me give you one other version of the why now, which doesn't have I think all of those are true, like explosion of devices, more time. So you could actually like sort of create these synchronous experiences. Mine is more like focused on distribution why now, which is new social experiences often emerge because they give you superpowers on existing social platforms. And I think Clubhouse and Make are two examples of products that do that. Like in Clubhouse, you stand out on Twitter by taking a screenshot and saying you were there. And it created this sort of like enablement where if you had access, it was like a combination of these things. And if you had access, you got huge engagement by posting a screenshot of you in the room with Elon or you in the room with Naval in the early days. You felt like you got cred by being there. So you won the game of Twitter by being present in Clubhouse. And that created enough momentum for you. For TikTok, where most kids are spending most of their day, a product like Make that lets you create music on the fly in this really awesome new way and create soundtracks enables you to sound like an incredible creator on TikTok and create entirely new sounds. And so it's like performance enhancing drugs for TikTok created by like using the product of Make. And so that's how these things get their momentum. And then they have to focus on really killing retention and like the engagement and creating their own game for status within the products to succeed and sustain in the long run. But I think that's part of the why now is the two platforms that matter, Twitter and TikTok, are sort of like leveraging status, adopting status. You can gain status from Clubhouse or from Make.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I think a lot about is like the inherent rate of like inflation and social capital. And so if you think about like a healthy social network, like I think there's an argument that you always want to be adding new features and dynamics into a healthy social ecosystem, if for no other reason to create an inflation rate, right? Where like if you don't stay up with the platform, you basically get diluted out, right? And if you do, it creates new opportunities for new people to rise and like allow you to keep playing the game to some degree. Whereas I think there's no question that in the broader social ecosystem, the thing Josh said, where like if you don't have an inflation rate, you end up with effectively like an entrenched aristocracy, which makes no one want to play anymore, right? Whereas like the healthy system, is creating that chaos. Something like a Clubhouse, Make potentially in the future as it's coming, like creates that is an important part of that kind of that inherent inflation rate in social capital. But I'm curious. So like, when you think about audio though, like when we're seeing what we see right now, is audio just like, I mean, I said earlier on this call, and I think it wasn't my idea. I honestly don't remember whose it was, but I didn't come up with this, that like Clubhouse basically is the new Snap story. And in 6 months, there's going to be a Clubhouse in everything. Do you think that's true? Or like, I don't know, do you think like, and that doesn't mean that's the sum of audio, but like, do you think that's just like, or that's not going to happen? Or that's going to be a slightly different dynamic?
I think it's clear that they're going to be audio is just a great format that enhances a lot of different categories. Doesn't necessarily mean that like Clubhouse can't take the lead that they've built and build great experiences, shows, right? Josh's show there has this, momentum to it, this inertia to it. Tipping, there are all these features, like Clubhouse today, maybe you can replicate that, but all the features that come after what Clubhouse is today and their momentum and the status that they built and their sort of lead that they built, that's hard to replicate for the future.
I think you also have this issue of the entrenched monetization strategies. Like, it was easy for Instagram to adopt stories because it was not that different of an advertising model. It was still display ads. You could, short videos, short or photo clips with some kind of caption. While it was vertical versus square, it wasn't all that different. And they basically could easily port their existing advertising strategy. Whereas audio requires, it's different inputs, different consumption pattern. And I think a lot of these networks will be scared to give audio the place that it needs to truly flourish in their app without worrying about cannibalizing their existing monetization. I think Instagram really led the way here by saying like, we know that this is the future. We're going to give it a huge chunk of homepage real estate. But I think they also realized that they could pretty quickly port their existing advertising system to it. And I think if they realized that it was going to massively cannibalize time from the feed, but they didn't have a great way to monetize it right away, it would be a lot scarier to make those kind of decisions. And I think that will hold back some of these major social networks from adopting this immediately.
Maybe. Ikram, I'm kind of curious what your take is. You've been working on this stuff, and for what it's worth, I think the ENS approach, which is much more like sound bites versus like, the long form stuff we've been talking about, like, it should yield much higher quality content. Right? This is like my big problem with Clubhouse in respect to Josh's show is like, on average, it's really boring, right? Like, that doesn't mean everything's really boring, just on average, it's really boring. I'm kind of curious what you think now that you've seen kind of like audio get embraced. Like, do we move to short form quickly? Like, what's going to happen with the evolution of the major platforms, et cetera?
I mean, I'm very excited about what Clubhouse is doing for ENS in regards to more people being like, oh, audio is going to be like a thing. And I agree with you, Sam, which is, so our belief at ENS is actually we're kind of the opposite of Clubhouse. We're not synchronous. So it's all about like, it's kind of like we're just like Twitter, but voice. So if I had to put someone that we plan to sort of go head to head with or pull people away from, or actually bring in a new group of people, it's there are going to be all these people making tweets, but it's actually going to be making ENSs because they'll realize that making kind of like a tweet with their voice is far easier. So now Twitter has this, like they have the notion of you can make an audio tweet, but with companies like Twitter that have to add other ways of doing things, it reminds me of when like Google added or Facebook added payments into like their messenger. Like at one point, every messenger app added payments to their app, but there's something nice about being like voice first. And I think Clubhouse sets ENS up for like people getting accustomed to consuming audio and realizing the convenience of it. But eventually everyone uses ENS.
I'm somewhat skeptical about it, respectfully so, just that audio is really tough to preview. When you take a look at a photo or a video, you get a pretty good sense of it in a very short period of time, especially with photos, but even with videos. Whereas with audio, it's tough from the first 2 seconds or 3 seconds to tell how interesting something's going to be for 60 seconds or even 30 seconds. Yeah. And I think that makes the sampling and like feed-based like discovery really tough. And that's why we haven't seen this for like music, for instance. We didn't see an Instagram for music or for like, song discovery. Spotify hasn't built that interface yet. And I think that, the Clubhouse experience of you choose a room and you kind of like sit in it for maybe like 5, 10, 20 minutes, even an hour or two, like that works a lot better because you give it's not about rapidly having to read, discover and make a decision about whether I want to consume something. You have fewer of those decisions. So it almost works a little bit more like traditional television where it's like, I put on a channel and I sort of wait for it to get good. But I do agree that like high content density is really important. And I think long-term, the shows that will succeed on Clubhouse will be the ones where people put in prep work ahead of time to book the best guests, to prep them on questions, to think of the best questions, not just sort of like jump into a totally spontaneous conversation that's going to be really dominated.
Can you jump in here? You say what you want to say versus not say, but I remember in our early conversations, this was my big push to you. It was like, there's not going to be an Instagram for audio because Instagram is on average boring, but who cares? Because I can consume 20 things per second and like, I'll pick the thing, I get to do that work. Whereas I think it's super hard with audio. Like, talk to us about like kind of what you've learned and how you're thinking about some of that stuff to the extent you're willing to share.
Yeah, sure. I think there has like a format change has happened really since Musical.ly and TikTok, right? And I think that's why it could succeed like more and more over Instagram as well. I think young people have an attention span that is super short, 8 to 12 seconds, right? So it has like, you have to produce stuff that is not that long anymore. And the second thing I think is a design format change, that the raw, the real, the ugly is really front and center right now. It's not about picture perfect anymore. As I think Niko said, everything comes in counterweights, right? We've been going through this perfect bubblegum world now with Instagram. I think now you're going more to like, okay, showing more real and raw, which what TikTok is doing, and I think some other platforms too. And I think the third thing about audio is that you can actually show more of your personality. Even if you just listen to 3 seconds of someone speaking, I think it almost shows more personality, because you can hide yourself than on a photo that you can tweak and you put a lot of filters on. And I think a lot of young people we're going through a new emo wave, which you call sad boys and sad girls. And so people are actually more vulnerable than ever, as they're also more lonely than ever, as Gen Z is generally like often talked about. So I think audio has something where you can connect with people that you just might not find anymore, especially as you don't pick up the phone anymore, you're not calling anyone anymore, but you still have that need. And I think that's really helpful. And you should really look into like the trends, right? Like if I talk with family and friends in Europe or in Latin America, people are using WhatsApp voice messages all the time, and it's still not a thing in the US for some reason. So I think there's a lot of things that can happen there. On the learnings though, I think I would disagree that just Alexa and Home, I think for like entertainment and communication, they're not that helpful, I would say. Even the earpods right now have so much delay still that it's really tricky. So we're really, really early days still when it comes to like phones and audio tech, because a lot of people in audio tech love to work on the perfect audio, which is all happening on desktop. And so I think that's where we're not seeing that much. And even Apple is still working on catching up and getting the Bluetooth delays like out there right now. So I think as the tech and the phone around audio gets better, I think there will be more opportunities into different directions, not just information, but also education and entertainment.
Can I push back on one thing there, though? You talked about that like short attention span of Gen Z, and I think they often get pigeonholed for this. And I don't actually believe they have a short attention span. If you look, there's a lot of TikToks that are a minute long that are these long stories that lead up to like a punchline, and kids are sticking with it to watch those. I don't think it's that they have a shorter attention span. I just think that they're more rapidly discerning. I think they make a choice about whether they want to consume something faster. And it's not about like whether they're like, oh, 7 seconds into like a 30-second thing, they get bored and tune out. I think it's that they just choose whether they want to watch it at all in the first 5 seconds and then move on to find the thing they will put their attention
into. But they can also take in more information at the same time. And regarding the longer videos, I would say, I remember doing my YouTube days when I was at YouTube, then you also were pushing for longer videos, right? So you're seeing something similar happening on TikTok right now as well.
It's about, you know what it reminds me of? You guys remember, I always think it's funny. You watch old movies. In the old movies, the credits were at the front of the movie, not the back of the movie. You remember that? You ever seen this? And like as our generation, it drives me fucking nuts, right? I remember watching these movies, and you're like 5 minutes of credits at the front with some like scene and like this, and like just like, and yeah, it's like if you're committed, that's the only movie in the house for the night. You know what I mean? It's on television. It's like, yeah, like I'm the creator. I'm gonna put that shit up front. The second I have choice, like I'm not waiting to do that. Like get to the fucking point, right? And so I think like they're like, to your point, I do think like people, and it's funny because it's very prejudiced for, to make fun of the younger generation for a second, like a generation that's so woke is like actually super prejudiced, right? Because they're just going to make their decisions in like 2 seconds based on like 4 social cues, and they're either in or out, right? But once they're in, they'll stick around, I think. But I don't know, I mean, I think it's interesting. So I want to ask another question, which Lydia in the chat is asking, and Ikram, it's kind of for you, but I think I'd be curious, is like, so again, audio, the question is kind of in relation to like Giphy clips, right? And like we've seen like visual content go in like different directions, right? Where like, in very different forms. But the question is like clipped audio. I guess Stefan, you'll have a view on this too for sure. Is like, are we gonna like, is there gonna be like a Giphy of sounds? Or do you think those like, and like, how is that gonna work with like super clipped audio? And how is the super short gonna combine with like the super long?
I mean, there's definitely going to be like a Giphy for sound. Like, I mean, people trying to impersonate each other. You can make clips like that. Like someone's going to build a bunch of filters into short sound bites that are fun to play with. I bet. I mean, if you look at kind of like the way the music world works, auto-tune became like a huge filter that basically now every like artist is using. I think there's some apps where like you can tune your voice, like just the general population can tune their voices, and I don't know, there are all kinds of things, reverb and whatever. It's bound to happen. Like I want to be able to talk like Sam. Quick, like like imagine if I can turn my audio bite into something that sounds just like Les Sam. It's like I think I think people.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
I definitely thought a lot smarter. No, I'm just joking.
The key is, Ikram, you wouldn't be smarter. You might just sound sweet.
No, but I mean, I think those little interactions are going to start to happen. I think the general gist is now more people are like, and developers, which is one of the things we're pushing on with Ents is our API. Like, we've started integrating voice capabilities into other apps. Like, the convenience you get with talking to Alexa, what if you could get that with talking to customer support, or like talking to like inside of like Venmo or something? So I think what's starting to happen is more developers are going to start playing with voice as like a medium, and then you're going to start to see all kinds of cool things.
I wonder, and again, I want to hear Stefan's response to you, but to me, it seems like the big loser in this is Spotify. Like, to me, if you think about it, like, they've always been this like channel, and for me, I don't know, for the last 15 years, like, I was just always, if you're working, you're doing something, like, there was this world of like workers who had to be on the phone or something, and there's a world of like computer workers, and computer workers like don't use their audio channel, so we're just listening to music all day long and thinking and writing and coding or whatever, and like that channel got picked up by like just massive. I wonder if we'll end up in a world, right, whether it's short form or long form or some combination, where like, I don't know, like I just wonder if that channel is ultimately gets cannibalized out of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the real loser here is especially for things like Clubhouse, is anybody who's trying to sell exclusive access to like knowledge or speaking. The tech conferences particularly are just in trouble right now. They're like, you're going to be able to get better talks most nights on Clubhouse than are like the headlining talks of multi-$1,000 ticket conferences. And like, especially with not having to travel there, the fact that it's so much less of a lift for the speakers, like you can literally just jump in for what you're talking. You have no travel time, no prep time, no like, you don't have to do anything for getting ready to go on stage. And I think that that's going to lower the barrier to better speakers, which is going to make it a lot harder for places to get people to pay for that attention. And similarly, I think one of the biggest problems with recorded audio content is just the discovery problem of the decision paralysis of having infinite content to choose from. And I think, a slightly curated, even if it's like ad hoc community curated and somewhat algorithmically curated, where people are voting with their feet to decide which, channels or talks are interesting right now, the fact that you just have a good ranked list of what is the most interesting thing people are talking about right now in the world, being able to choose from those is just so much easier than choosing from the infinite archive of playlists and podcasts that Spotify has. I think people will choose in that direction. It's similarly, Spotify had to invent Discover Weekly to be able to make use of its massive catalog. It had to think of all these algorithmic playlists to be able to make use of that catalog, because they knew that the search bar wasn't enough. And so I think similarly, Spotify is going to have to adapt to how do you make discovery of this kind of spoken content so much easier, akin to Discover Weekly. Otherwise, the easier discovery of just picking through a ranked list from Clubhouse is going to be a lot easier.
Matt and Stefan, I want to hear, we're running out of time, and I want to be respectful of people's days. So I think the interesting thing about doing these kind of things all virtual is they can go on forever, which is bad for people who have shit to do today. But I want to hear quickly, Stefan and Matt, you guys are both touching music more directly, right? Like, Matt, you've got like a different, I'll let you guys describe your own things, but like, what do you think happens to Spotify? Like, am I just like, where do we go from here?
My instinct is Spotify looks more like AWS. They've unlocked all this really complicated rights infrastructure. It used to be a death knell to try to build anything in music. And I think we've finally gotten to a point where Spotify has simplified so much of the process of like accessing the world's best audio content, podcasts, music, that like, and the API is getting so great now that I think what you see is like an explosion of products and experiences on the back of that. And people will build things that allow you to like, search and create clips and create long form contextual experiences on top, whether it's conversations or co-listening. I think we're at the beginning of my instinct is that Spotify is the beginning of its run, just because as a company building on the back of it, Road Trip couldn't exist without that product. And I look at them very favorably. I also think that their product team is exceptional. I think they're accelerating their product development in the last couple of years, not slowing it down. And so, to questions like Alexia's, I look at I think songs are sort of like this incredible format that sustains attention. I think audio is really hard to be great at in live formats. And I think songs, much like video games and Twitch, keep your attention level at a certain rate that you don't dip below the boredom threshold on. And so that's why we see such crazy long engagement times with Spotify and podcasts is when you have professional content in a long form, it can sprinkle over every experience. And so my instinct is that Spotify is a great product for years to come.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think it's just a platform as many other great platforms are. And I think people gravitate to be a Spotify artist like they are in some areas to be a SoundCloud artist. And I think the exciting thing about audio and music in general is just that this hasn't been democratized to the same amount as maybe photo and video has, and even writing has, like short writing and long form writing. And so I think we're going to be seeing what is going to be working out really well in what area specifically by just enabling more people to play around with a new medium.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we'll end it there. I mean, I'll do the host thing and take last word. Although, why not? Is I think what's really interesting about audio.
You never worry that you're gonna get a shitty conversation in Spotify.
Yeah. No, and I think I was gonna say this. I think look, the nice part about audio, and in my mind, discussion is a specific type of sub-content of piece of audio is actually the lowest barrier shit in the world. If you think about it, humans are deeply programmed to talk to each other, right? Way more deeply than writing, way more deeply than anything else. This is actually what we do fundamentally. So the good news is if the internet was supposed to be the sum total of all human knowledge and all human communication, the good news about audio, right, is that I think it'll pump way more content, right, than text ever could, right? And so we're just going to have more shit. And if it's transcribed and recorded and structured properly, the search index of that and the opportunities, whether that's emotional content or knowledge or whatever, is going to be vastly larger than it's ever been before. And I wrote this last summer when Clubhouse was first starting up. I was the opportunity for Clubhouse in my mind is or audio in general is the actual internet, right? What it was promised to be in terms of the corpus. The problem is going to be search and discovery, right? Because it turns out that the discussions of 7 billion people, the audio of 7 billion people, while it's the lowest barrier, it's when you lower barriers to zero, you get all this shit, right? It turns out the content, the average value per minute drops to zero, right? We've seen that, the lower the barrier, the more crap you get. And so the question is, when you drop that barrier to zero, these questions, whether it's a Roadhouse or Ikram's approach with Ents or Stefan or Josh's kind of community building approaches, how the hell do you curate and actually find signal and value on top of it? Because the content will be there, right? It will just be so shitty on average, right? That I think there's a lot to develop. In some ways, the irony is it's not clear to me that the platforms that collect the audio will actually be that valuable. But just as Google didn't start out as the content that collected the internet, the value is going to go to whoever builds indexing and search on top of that, and then curation on top of that. So I mean, that's at least how I think about that stuff. Anyway, thank you all. You guys are all obviously doing super interesting things, and I appreciate you joining. I think we'll close up there. Again, I appreciate everyone joining. I really, we have a lot of fun with these mini conferences. Honestly, talk about audio. This is how I get to do some thinking, and hopefully other people do too, about where things are going. We'll keep doing them at slow, as they periodically. And yeah, I hope everyone else has an awesome and productive day doing what you do. Listen to what you listen to. Bye, everyone. Thank you.